Additional states are considering legislation to ban coyote-specific contests and other wildlife killing contests. I ask you to consider a full ban on the killing contests of both predator and non-predator wildlife. These predators' diets are heavy in rodents. Hantavirus is a problem in Colorado as well across the nation. Colorado currently had 104 cases in Colorado of hantavirus. 36% of hantavirus cases result in death. Foxes, coyotes, they all take out mice. Possums consume ticks. Water fur bearers eat insects. They provide food for raptors. Basically, that's it. Thank you for listening, and I yield 40 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Do you want to pass around that other public comment? We can just share. We can. Thank you. Sorry to make you come all the way. Thank you. Okay, we have one more public comment, and then I do think we need to move on to the next agenda item. David Sluice.
I'd like to thank members of the Commission for allowing me to speak. My name is Dave Sluss, and I live in Edgewater, Colorado. Wildlife killing contests violate the fundamental principles of ethical hunting. In these events, the concept of fair chase is frequently disregarded, and the animals killed are usually left to waste. These issues can lead Coloradans to view this enthusiasm for mass killing of animals as barbaric, cruel, and wasteful, which could negatively impact not only the image of sportsmen and women, but of the hunting industry in general. State agencies and officials have recognized the damage killing contests inflict on traditional hunting. Ray Powell, former member of the New Mexico Commission of State Lands, has said, the non-specific indiscriminate killing methods used in commercial and unrestricted coyote killing contests are not about hunting or sound land management. These contests are strictly about personal profit and animal cruelty. It is time to outlaw this activity, and in 2019, New Mexico did just that. Again, in 2019, Arizona Fishing Commission said to the extent these contests reflect overall hunting community, public outrage with these events has the potential to threaten hunting as a legitimate wildlife management function. The Commission also banned this in last October. Also in 2019, Massachusetts had banned these killing contests, and in doing so, they recognized that public controversy over this issue has the potential to threaten predator hunting and undermine public support for hunting in general. With these issues in mind, I'd like to ask that Colorado take its inspiration from these remarkable, forward-thinking professionals and likewise defend its renowned reputation as a recreational destination by banning these cruel, unsporting, and wasteful contests. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sluss. Any comments? Okay, I think Katie is looking for direction from Commission on this. Do we have any Commission discussion or direction? I think the direction they're looking for is, do we want to continue staff to look into this issue, or do we not? Is that correct, Katie? Can you give some more guidance?
You could provide additional guidance if you already have in mind potential regulatory changes that you would like to see perhaps in draft form. You could give us guidance on that. If there's additional research or background that you need, if you could let us know what that is so we can bring it back to you. That would be good to know. Okay.
I did say from Commissioner McDaniel he would support banning killing contests. Any other? Commissioner Garcia and then Commissioner Haskett. And I will look to the right, I promise.
This obviously is going to be very controversial. And I heard a list of organizations that are allegedly holding these types of contests, which included youth organizations across the state of Colorado, which we support. So I'm a little concerned. I would suggest that we need to do a lot of public outreach to find out what our constituents, those that are holding these contests as well as those that oppose them, before we even begin to discuss formulating any sort of ban or any policies.
Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you. I would also like to see what Arizona just did, if we could get their information.
Commissioner Blecka.
Yeah, I would like to see some representation from rural Colorado, other than myself. in this conversation, and Commissioner Bray. Everybody that came up is from the urban side of Colorado, and I think that this is something that is a much larger conversation than just organizations. And I think that we need to, if we're gonna talk contests, I think we need to look at the fishing component too.
And just to, for the record, Commissioner Hauser, I think some of the folks
We have
were
several from the Western Slope that testified.
as well. Okay. Director Gibbs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm from rural Colorado, and I think we should look at this more and look at what Arizona and New Mexico did, report back on some of the key components of that, and then we can have a further discussion. But I think this is important to explore.
Commissioner Hauser.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would maybe echo Commissioner Garcia's comments. As I mentioned earlier, this was a pretty significant conversation among sort of the Western commissions. And I agree. I think learning from Arizona, who did this very proactively, for a variety of reasons, would be helpful to us. There were also, just sort of playing devil's advocate, there were also commentary about sort of the declining number of youth entering or interested in fishing, hunting, sort of that pipeline. And we've talked a lot about that. Certainly a number of the other commissions did as well. And this was a successful tool. So that's not my opinion. I'm just sort of sharing that. And so as we invite commentary and learn more and ask staff to come back, I would say let's ensure that that is balanced, and we hear from youth groups or others that whether in recognizing to Jake's comment that fishing may be different, but what species, what do these contests look like? Anyway, it'd just be helpful to have a more balanced understanding so that we can take this issue forward.
So it sounds like jotting down some notes. Sounds like the commission would like to see staff continue to look into this, to come back to us with additional public outreach, public input, with additional input from rural Colorado, and perhaps if we can look into fishing, or if we want to decouple that.
And maybe I need to clarify, I meant the agricultural community. Sorry, I didn't mean, I know rural has different components. I meant to say, my intention was agriculture.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. That's helpful. And then the other thing was, what did Arizona and New Mexico do proactively? Did I miss Director? Is that clear, Director Penfield? Okay.
Yeah, I think it might. So we'll work on that. I don't know if our analysis did, but Commissioner Blecka brings up a good point. We should talk to Kate Greenberg and her staff too. So as we do that analysis.
And if I may, in the memo that I sent you, Arizona banned predator and fur bear killing contests in 2019. New Mexico banned coyote killing contests in 2019. So those were the changes that they made there.
Okay. I think we're in agreement. Is that sufficient?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the additional time on that, everyone. I know we're running behind. Appreciate Fletcher Jacobs, you are up next with Colorado the Beautiful grants.
Madam Chair, Directors, and Commissioners, my name is Fletcher Jacobs. I'm the State Trails Program Manager. I'm here today to present on the Colorado the Beautiful Trail Grants and present our funding recommendations. So the Colorado the Beautiful vision was launched in 2016 by our previous, it was a Colorado the Beautiful initiative. The vision was that within a generation, every Coloradan will live within 10 minutes of a park, trail, or vibrant green space. There were several different components to this overall initiative. This grant program was one of them. It also involved our Colorado Trail Explorer app, which was the first effort of its kind to map all of the different trails in Colorado, as well as identifying the 16 and 16 different trail connections was kind of the overall vision. This grant cycle in particular is really working towards increasing that access, and what makes it different than our typical motorized or non-motorized grant cycle is they're actually much larger pots of money towards construction, so you can read off all of the various pieces there, but really trying to find ways to make some more of those connections to existing outdoor recreation opportunities, as well as taking a little bit stronger stance toward the planning grant and having some, putting a lot more beef behind these kind of large-scale regional trail and resource planning efforts. So just as a bit of a background, kind of with all of our trail grants that come through, the Colorado Beautiful is no different. Each trail grant application is evaluated and ranked against each other. The Trails Grant application is really a 4-tiered review process. When it comes to the wildlife piece in particular, it starts off, each of these grant applications are reviewed by our wildlife managers in the field. They work with our regional staff to prepare our wildlife regional summaries, which you all have a copy of in the action item I sent out there. We take a look at those as the Trails program and then submit those to our Colorado the Beautiful subcommittee, which is made up of staff as well as DNR staff, CPW regional staff, GOCO staff, as well as volunteer reviewers from our State Trails Committee and other members of the recreating public. That committee reviews those grants. We've scored them with those wildlife issues. That went in front of our State Trails Committee for their approval, and now we come up in front of you with the commission. I'm happy to report we had, during this process, we had one grant that we had some concerns with, and I'm going to speak about it here in a little bit and kind of how we work to resolve those issues. Along with this, I want to make sure I'm very clear with the wildlife concerns. Also in each of these steps, we also had public comment at various different steps along the process during the grant application, where we actually, after the grants were submitted, had them on our website where we accepted written public comment. And in the subcommittee meeting that happened in this room, we also accepted public comment, as well as the State Trails Committee accepted the public comment kind of along the way. So this year we received 14 total grants, split evenly between the construction and planning, for a total of a little over $3.19 million. So I mentioned that, and this is always my least favorite slide. We have all the information in there. You obviously have this in your packets, but I think the big piece that comes through, or excuse me, the one piece I want to highlight is we look through these various grants when it comes to construction. These were all big connections, all scored very well. When it came to those with the planning grants, you can see those asked. What I think is really neat is last year when we did this Colorado the Beautiful, we actually had, we had 12 grants that came through. 10 of them were for construction. Only 1 was for planning. This year we had a much more interest in the planning, and I think as an agency, that's something, especially as the Trails program, something we've really been pushing our applicants, our land managers, the various groups that we talk to, that we really want to have a much more thoughtful approach about where we're putting the trails and how we're thinking about where these things go. When it comes to the planning, I now want to speak to the one wildlife concern that we had during the review process. The outside 285 grant was one that our wildlife staff, you can read the exact comments there in the Northeast Regional Summary, had some concerns specifically with 2 areas that were put in the planning. They kind of had a big master plan. They'd worked together with the Forest Service that actually asked them to come back, and instead of doing what we always kind of joke about, this kind of mile by mile trail approach, to actually have this landscape level look at the trail in a much more thoughtful planning way, and it just fit in really well with this grant cycle. So as we were doing that, we noticed 2 of the areas were ones that our wildlife staff had very big concerns with, outside of Waterton Canyon and very close to Guanella Pass. So we actually approached the applicant after we heard those concerns. We shared those with the applicant, and during the subcommittee review, where we actually have the applicant stand in front of us, answer some of the questions, ask them to address that, and we were, quite honestly, we're really happy with the direction it took. The applicants quickly addressed that concern by removing those 2 pieces from the overall planning grant. And then the other piece was, during the conversation, not only with our staff, but also via public comment, there was this desire to not just look at other recreational groups, which, to their credit, the Colorado Mountain Bike Association put in. They did a great job of bringing in other hiking groups as well as equestrian groups, but we really wanted to try to make sure we also bring in the conservation groups to make sure they had a voice at the table. So during the discussion with the applicant, we made the proposal that we actually work with them in partnership together. They admitted that they would love some help to make sure we're doing the proper outreach to those groups and kind of bringing them in to be part of this conversation, not only with our staff and the Forest Service, who by far manages this land, but also with Jefferson County Open Space, the other land manager, who obviously has an interest in where these go. So the applicant was definitely interested in that. We did slightly reduce their amount requested was for $100,000. We reduced that down to just over $88,000 because we removed 2 of those big pieces from Guanella Pass and Waterton Canyon, and they were definitely agreeable to that solution. So that was the one issue, and again, I think it's kind of highlights where this having this reviewed process actually is a big plus, and I think it could potentially be a model for how we approach these things, where we're making sure we have user groups. When we say user groups, not just meaning the recreational trail user groups, but also our conservation user groups who are out there also, wanting to enjoy these outdoor spaces. So With all of that, the recommended funding that I come before you today, we recommended funding 7 construction grants. You can see the numbers there for a little over 2.3 million, and then 6 planning grants, so for a total of $2.9 million. And just as a reminder, because I failed to mention at the beginning, this will be the last cycle of the Colorado the Beautiful. This was the end of sort of this money, so this will be last time these grants come before you. With that, I'll take questions or any public comment.
Thank you, Fletcher. Great presentation. Bummed this is the last cycle, but very impressed with the with the folks and the applicants and all the work that went into this. Commissioner comments, and then I do have public comments. Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say thank you for including the wildlife reviews from the regions in here. I think it really is illustrative of the process that you were just articulating, and it's really helpful to be able to see that these steps have all been vetted at that local level through all of our professionals. So definitely would love to see that with every single grant process.
We'll make sure that continues moving forward.
Absolutely. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you as well, and particularly bringing in CPW managers to look at some of these wildlife issues. So it's extremely helpful in reviewing these. I did have one question, and it goes to as you're looking at the relative value of these projects, do you consider the independent financial status of the organizations, i.e. I see projects going to Denver, Boulder, Steamboat. You know, it's not hard for us to figure out that our rural communities don't have the kind of money that these places have. And do we place a priority on that fact?
I think that's a great question, and that's something that I would love more help with getting more of that out. I will say that, jumping ahead, I'll be coming back in front of you in March with our non-motorized trails grants, and I was really impressed that we had much more rural, we had much more applications from rural areas beyond what you see here. So I think we're beginning to do a better job, but that's something that I would like to see us do more to make sure, especially when it comes to that access piece, to make sure we're
Can we make
placing
that
as a priority.
can we make that part of the process? You know, when I look at Denver, we just passed ballot issues to give the city millions of dollars to do this, and then we turn around and give them more. When we have rural areas that don't have the ability to pass those sort of ballot issues, they don't have the resources, and they probably have a greater need. And we just, can we weigh that in any way in evaluating these projects?
Yes, I definitely think we can discuss that, and I'd be happy to figure out how we can do a better job of that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Hauser.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Somewhat of a follow-up comment, but maybe separate as well. I'm curious how much weight in these applications or the process is the adaptive nature of these trails, to recognize those that may struggle to access. I mean, I think of Staunton State Park and others. It would be really great to see many, many more of those, and considerations about accessibility, slope, sort of all the things that our accessible populations need.
Definitely.
I mean, there's lots of them, but just if you could comment on that.
Yes, I think that's something that we really look to the way we've seen our role is to say, you know, what is your need? Let's fund that. I think that's something that we can definitely do a better job of saying we would like to fund more of those types of projects for sure. I don't think we've placed as high a priority on that as we can.
Okay. Thank you. Let's take a couple of public comment, and then this is an action item. Suzanne O'Neill, Colorado Wildlife Federation. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Executive Director. We are now prepared to support the Outside 285 grant application. We really commend the Colorado Mountain Biking Association for proposing master planning there. It's really, really needed. Originally, we were somewhat concerned to make sure that the process would balance the demand for recreational trails with wildlife needs. And due to the clarifications by the State Trails Director and the Executive Director of COMBA, we're now satisfied that this can be a very good process and a model. So wanted to express that.
It's fantastic. Thank you. Thrilled to hear that. Of course, as someone who's been really pushing for more interaction with the mountain bike community, that's great feedback. Steve Banowski with Colorado Mountain Club. Welcome, Steve. Good to see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission, directors, Mr. Jacobs. My name is Steve Banowski. I'm here today on behalf of the Colorado Mountain Club to endorse the Outside 285 grant. The club is a hybrid organization. We were founded in 1912. We are the oldest and largest outdoor education, recreation, and conservation organization in the state. We have around 7,000 members statewide. 4,500 of them are in our Denver group or chapter, which encompasses the metro area, with the exception of Boulder, which has its own chapter. However, we also have members in Durango, Grand Junction, Montrose, Pueblo, Summit County, even used to have members in Craig, but I don't think we have any there now. It was my privilege to be a member of the Colorado the Beautiful review team on this, and I did disclose at the outset that I had been approached by COMBA to work with them. However, since we did not have any kind of agreement in place, it was felt by the powers that be on the review committee that there was no need to recuse myself. So I take my reviewer hat off and put on a citizen advocate hat. The club does endorse this proposal, and we will be working with them. Many of you know that Julie Mock is our conservation director. She's based in Salida. She has also endorsed this, and I think she may have even provided a letter of support. These grants start to run together after a while once you're no longer working on them. So we will be working with COMBA to the extent that they would like. The 285 corridor is one of our 4 project areas for our Denver Group or Chapters Conservation Program. We'll be bringing in our Denver Group Trails Chair. We'll be bringing in some new people to allow them to see what this kind of process looks like. I've already talked with that about Gary, or talked about that with Gary. And then you'll get my 37+ years experience in the broad-based Colorado conservation community, most with the club, but not all, as coming on board with this project. So we're looking forward to it, and I very strongly encourage that you approve these grants, particularly the Outside 285, and I'll give you 50 seconds back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments or questions? Okay, this is an action item. For the record, I'm going to read it into the record. In accordance with Section 3311-106 of the Colorado Revised Statutes, I move that the Parks and Wildlife Commission, actually, I will want someone to move, that the Parks and Wildlife Commission approve the scores and associated rankings for the recreational trails committees, grant review, and ranking subcommittees that were assigned to the 2019-2020 Colorado the Beautiful Trails grant applications. We recommend that the available Colorado the Beautiful grant funding be awarded in accordance with the Recreational Trails Committee's recommended funding allocation outlined in the discussion and summary section of this action item. Minor adjustments of project funding levels shall be permitted at the discretion of the Parks and Wildlife Division Director. Anyone like to make that motion? Commissioner Hauser, a second? Commissioner Adams. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you so much. We are going to go to agenda item 23. Emily with GOCO, thank you for being flexible. We will start tomorrow morning with items 19 and then 22. Steve Cooley with license suspension appeal. And I apologize for everyone here for public comment that we are behind. It's sometimes the nature of the game. Welcome, Mr. Cooley.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Executive Director, Director, and Commissioners. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Steve Cooley. I'm the State Hearing Examiner for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I'm appearing today on license suspension appeal in the case of Justin Miles. It's case number 8802. Mr. Miles has requested a review of his initial 4-year suspension decision and appears today in person to my left, your right. I'll provide a brief summary of the case and the decision, and then Mr. Miles will give his mitigating arguments in the case. Justin Miles has 2 separate criminal episodes within a 5-year period that led to his suspension hearing. First, in October of 2017, wildlife officers received information that Justin Miles had been photographed on a trail camera trespassing on private land while hunting elk on the Velarde Ranch in Huerfano County. Officers confirmed the reporting party's information and began to attempt to locate Mr. Miles and serve the citation. For the next year and a half, officers attempted to locate Mr. Miles but were not able to find him, either at his listed residence or in the town of Florence. In January of 2019, wildlife officers asked for the assistance from a Fremont County District Attorney investigator who was able to locate where Mr. Miles was working. Officers contacted Mr. Miles at his place of employment, and in January of 2019 issued Mr. Miles a citation. Mr. Miles later pled guilty in Huerfano County Court to unlawfully entering upon private land to hunt wildlife without permission. A second charge of hunting elk without a proper and valid license was dismissed by the district attorney. The guilty plea resulted in 20 license suspension points, and he was fined court costs and fees of $246.50. In the second criminal episode, on February 2nd of 2019, Colorado Wildlife Officer Gretchen Holschuh received a trespassing complaint from a landowner in Pueblo County stating that a hunter had parked on his private property and appeared to be hunting waterfowl. Officer Holschuh responded and met with several Pueblo County sheriff's deputies who were already on scene. The officers located the hunter, identified as Justin Miles, as he returned to his vehicle. Mr. Miles told the officers that he did not know he needed permission to hunt on private land and that he had hunted this area previously before without incident. The officers detected a strong odor of alcohol on Mr. Miles' person and questioned him about how much alcohol he had been drinking. Initially, he stated he had only drank 1 beer, later admitted to having drank 2 beers. The officers searched his backpack and found 5 empty beer cans, and Mr. Miles also admitted to having smoked a marijuana joint. He was cited and later pled guilty in Pueblo County Court. Counts 1 and 2, which were the trespassing charge and hunting under the influence of alcohol charges, were dismissed. Count 3, which was the unlawful take and possession of 3 Canada geese, was the charge that he pled guilty to. However, the geese can't stand as unlawful in and of themselves. So one of the 2 dismissed charges has to be the underlying basis for the illegal possession of these geese, but the court disposition didn't state which one of those it was. This guilty plea assessed 15 additional license suspension points against Mr. Miles' hunting and fishing privileges, and he also paid a $246.50 fine. So Mr. Miles has now been assessed 35 license suspension points within a 5-year period. He was noticed to a license suspension hearing. This notice to Mr. Miles was mailed via certified return receipt mailing in compliance with statute. The notice was returned to the hearings office as not deliverable as addressed and unable to be forwarded. Mr. Miles' address was confirmed as the same listed on his citations and court documents. The hearings office then attempted to contact Mr. Miles via email and phone using the information provided in his iPAWS account. The email went unanswered and the phone number could not be connected when dialed. The hearings office went beyond the statutory requirement of mailing the notice by emailing and calling Mr. Miles in an attempt to notify him of his upcoming hearing. A hearing was held in his absence, and in reviewing his case, I applied the factors listed in commission regulation to his case. The facts and circumstances that apply to his cases are that his violations did result in the take of wildlife. He has 2 criminal episodes over a 5-year period. His violations demonstrated an intentional disregard for public safety. His actions and the violations were both negligent and committed both negligently and knowingly. That's a mouthful. Mr. Miles was fined $246 in each episode, and the wildlife taken were 3 Canada geese. In response to Mr. Miles' request for an appeal, his primary complaint is that he was not notified of the hearing date. However, as I've previously detailed, the hearings office went beyond the statutory requirement and attempted to call and email him without success. As a side note, the U.S. Postal Service was able to successfully deliver his notice of decision to that same address. While Mr. Miles claimed that this suspension will hinder him from being able to provide food during the winter when he's laid off from work, Mr. Miles has only ever purchased a single small game license in 2017, which would indicate that he is not reliant on the wildlife of Colorado for food, unless he were taking the wildlife without a license. In this case, Mr. Miles has repeatedly demonstrated a disregard for Colorado's wildlife laws and has presented himself as a threat to the public safety. This case warrants a 4-year suspension, and I respectfully request that the commission uphold this decision. I'll have Mr. Miles come up at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Welcome, Mr. Miles.
I think there's a big misunderstanding here. I've been hunting and fishing for 50 years, almost 50 years, and I've never had a violation my whole life. I moved here in 2017 from St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. I still have the same phone number and area code, so I don't know if your phones don't go through there or what, but I still have the same phone number. I've had the same address and phone number since I got here, and was never contacted whatsoever by the division, and they didn't cite me for almost 2 years later. I had just, when that occurred, I had just got here from St. Thomas and was so excited to be back in the Rockies that I did a lot of hiking. I was helping a guy build a cabin down Forbes Park by Fort Garland, and I was up there hiking around the Pass Creek. Those guys, come to find out, sell elk tags for $7,500 each, so they didn't really appreciate me in there. I wasn't hunting, period. I was in there hiking. That's it. And on the second one, I was on 40th Lane in Avondale, which goes all the way to the river bottoms. And I didn't know that the landowners owned the Arkansas River. For where I'm from, that's not the case. The geese that I had were in my truck already and not taken from that site. And they took my shotgun. I drank 2 beers on the way out. I don't drink while I hunt. It's a long hike out of there, and I had a couple of beers on the way out. I would never do that. He failed to mention that I voluntarily blew a .05. Okay, it was not inebriated whatsoever. So the geese were taken down by Herfinau Reservoir that morning. These guys didn't cite me till dusk that night, and I didn't come out of there with anything. I didn't shoot anything down there, or in the other place. I have pictures of both sites. There's no fences. There's no signs. There's no nothing. And I apologize for I unknowingly trespassed, but I didn't break any other laws. And I think the penalty is extreme. I have here a letter from the Department of Interior from Maryland wanting a waterfowl survey. That's all I hunt is waterfowl, okay? And I wouldn't be getting this from them if I wasn't an accomplished hunter. So I've been doing it my whole life. Unfortunately, there was nothing to hunt in St. Thomas, and that's what brought me back. And to lose my license over something like that, I just think it for one, is a bit extreme, and I think that there's a misunderstanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miles. Questions for Mr. Miles or Mr. Cooley from the commission? Okay, this is an action item. Mr. Miles, we have all the materials in our, we get all the materials ahead of time, so we have reviewed your case all on our devices here. Looking at the action item, agenda item 23, we have a choice to uphold the license suspension or other. Any thoughts from commissioners? Commissioner Haskett.
I make a motion that we uphold the commission, or
The license suspension is made by
Yes.
staff.
Thank you.
I got it right here, so I'm one step ahead of you. So I can read them into the record correctly. A second?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Bray. Any comments, any discussion? Okay, let's, can we do voice vote? Okay, we do need to do, that's what I thought. We do need to do roll call vote on these. Thank you, Laura.
Adams?
Yes.
Lecca?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes.
Garcia?
Yes.
Haskett?
Yes.
Hauser?
Yes.
McDaniel is absent. Schaefer?
Yes.
Vardy,
Yes.
Vino,
Yes.
Chair Zimmerman.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Thank you, Mr. Miles. Appreciate you taking the time. Okay, we have agenda item 24, Mr. Cooley, license suspension appeal.
Once again, and still, good afternoon. Again, for the record, Steve Cooley, State Hearing Examiner for the Commission, appearing today in license suspension case number 8722 for Mr. Lawrence Cowart. Mr. Lawrence Cowart has requested a review of his initial lifetime suspension decision and is represented today by Counsel Jeffrey Whedon to my left. I'll provide a brief summary of the case, and then Mr. Whedon will give his arguments. In January of 2018, Colorado Parks and Wildlife officers received information regarding multiple illegal deer and pronghorn that had been killed by several men, including Lawrence Cowart, who were in Colorado working in the wind energy industry. At a minimum, 3 mule deer and 6 pronghorn were reported to have been killed in Elbert and Lincoln counties without any licenses and out of season. Cowart and others would drive to their work location with a firearm in their vehicle, shoot the animals and typically leave the carcass. Sometimes Cowart and others would return to the animals and cut off their antlers or horns, but others were left to waste after being shot. Through the course of the investigation, Parks and Wildlife officers learned that Lawrence Cowart could be tied to at least 1 buck pronghorn and 1 buck mule deer in velvet. Mr. Cowart left the majority of the meat on the carcasses or took none at all, taking the antlers and horns, which were later driven to a taxidermist in Florida. In March of 2018, Lawrence Cowart was arrested after a search of his apartment, and his vehicle produced evidence of multiple illegally taken big game animals. Mr. Cowart later pled guilty to the willful destruction of big game wildlife occurring between May 1, 2017 and December 1, 2017. Willful destruction of big game is a classified felony, and as a result of Mr. Cowart's guilty plea, he faced a mandatory suspension of 1 year to a maximum of life. Mr. Cowart waived the factual basis of his case in his plea agreement and acknowledged the findings of the investigation. Mr. Cowart appeared by phone for his license suspension hearing. Unfortunately, I did have a microphone malfunction during that hearing, so there is no transcript, although he did appear by telephone. In summary, he offered that he was sorry for what he had done. He described it as pure stupidity and stated that it would not happen again regardless of what state he was working in. He wanted to have the opportunity to show his 1-year-old daughter the right way to hunt and fish. In reviewing Mr. Cowart's case, I applied the factors listed in commission regulation to the facts and circumstances of his case and his conviction for willful destruction. His violations did result in the take of big game wildlife. His violations demonstrated an intentional disregard for wildlife. His actions were also committed intentionally. Mr. Cowart does have a previous wildlife violation in 2 separate states, North Carolina and Florida. Mr. Cowart has previously been suspended for wildlife violations in his home state of Florida. Mr. Cowart was not licensed to hunt anywhere in Colorado and has never purchased a license in Colorado. Mr. Cowart has hunted his entire life and is considered to be a knowledgeable and experienced hunter. Mr. Cowart was fined $2,440.50 and placed on 3 years of probation. Mr. Cowart acted in concert with the others in the commission of the crime, and buck mule deer and buck pronghorn were taken during the criminal episode. In determining Mr. Cowart's suspension, his criminal acts can only be described as those of a poacher. His behavior is egregious and cannot in any way be associated with the fair chase ethics commonly applied to legal hunting. There is perhaps no other game and fish crime as serious as the deliberate and willful destruction of big game for the trophy parts. A lifetime suspension is not given lightly and without thoughtful consideration to all the facts and circumstances. Having looked at everything in this case, a lifetime suspension is warranted, and I respectfully request the commission uphold this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Welcome, Mr. Whedon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, directors, State Hearing Examiner Cooley, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today regarding the lifetime suspension of Mr. Cowart. Normally, I'm able to present a more factual review of the case. This is a very unusual circumstance in that there was not a transcript available. For whatever reason, we just didn't have that information, and so I have a briefer review, which, with the look at where we are on the agenda, is going to be appreciated by everyone here, and also a bit of a more intuitive review. One of the things that I'm not often in front of the commission, but I'm often in front of the state hearing examiner. And one thing that I'm able to share often is that Mr. Cooley is going to be tough but fair, and if he detects any kind of not telling the truth, maybe that makes him more upset than anything else, and rightfully so. In this case, I would suggest that with the 20-point violation, that a lifetime suspension is not necessarily in line with what is normally done. The fact of the matter is that it's a serious case. The charges are serious. I'm not trying to argue that they wouldn't even possibly be warranted. I am asking for some mercy and grace in this particular case, because Mr. Cowart had believed that and erroneously, there was nothing wrong with what State Hearing Examiner Cooley had done in his analysis at all, but that Mr. Cowart believed that these transgressions of his in the past had either been expunged or he had been able to earn his way out of the difficulty in some way. He was wrong about that. But by not sharing that, he was unable, and he was fumbling, he was terrified, he suffers from some anxiety issues, and he was there telephonically, which I always think is a mistake. He honestly felt that those violations were not on North Carolina, Florida, were on his record. And when he was saying those things, he wasn't trying to be willfully telling something that wasn't correct. And I think that State Hearing Examiner Cooley was very right in his mind to be very angry at someone who felt that they were simply lying to him at that date. But the fact of the matter is that that misunderstanding is something that I was able to at least partially confirm in my research, that it would have at least been plausible for someone, particularly someone who showed some, he said that, I think he admitted that it was just really dumb, and that he also had some profound immaturity, that was the situation, instead of him willfully telling not the truth. He's very remorseful and was fully accountable, not trying to give any mitigation whatsoever. In light of the situations regarding the misunderstanding regarding his previous suspensions, our suggestion is that it's with the felony matter, that the substantial fines and costs and fees, permanent conviction with all the losses and privileges of rights that come from that, and justifiably so, that Mr. Cowart was hoping not to overturn necessarily a lifetime suspension, but was to suggest that with a 1-year-old daughter, that there would be something less than that a 20-point suspension would instead generate perhaps a 15 or a 20-year suspension, giving her the opportunity at her 16th or 21st birthday to maybe be able to have that experience with her father. He has been exploring with me the opportunity, because sometimes the Colorado Parks and Wildlife folks are good enough to allow someone who's been in a great deal of trouble to speak and to be able to tell people about what they've done, mistakes they've made, what other folks shouldn't have done. And it's something that I'm actually very grateful that the brothers, officers and investigators within the Colorado Parks and Wildlife give people the opportunity, because it's these people who have had profound problems that are oftentimes a profound advocate for being able to do the right thing in the future. I hope he has the ability to do that, and he has told me that he will try to do that, whether or not this commission takes another look at the lifetime suspension. He understands that a very significant suspension is necessary for his conduct in Colorado. He does apologize to this commission. He intended to be here, work. He had it all squared away, but work got in the way. And I would have liked for you to have been able to ask questions, particularly of Mr. Cowart, but you would have perhaps also been able to see the fact that he is mortified about the situation and terrified about speaking to anybody. And it would have given just a bit of a context to why he answered the question incorrectly to State Hearing Examiner Cooley, and why that made State Hearing Examiner Cooley so justifiably angry. I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions or concerns from the commission about Mr. Cowart's ability to fully comply someday in the future with fishing and hunting regulations in Colorado. And with that, and with the time that you've had this today, I will go ahead and let Madam Commissioner move forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whedon. Thank you for a little additional background. Again, we do have all the materials, and I know that we've all looked through them. Any commissioner comments, questions, discussion? Commissioner Garcia.
Mr. Cooley, may or may not be relevant, but when I looked through this, I thought, why are we even having this discussion? Is Mr. Cowart not subject to PALPA? Possession of a weapon by a previous offender, he's a convicted felon, which means he can't possess a weapon for the rest of his life.
He pled guilty to a felony in this case.
So I ask myself, why are we here? If he's prevented, both federally and by state, for possessing a weapon, which certainly includes a firearm, arguably a bow and arrow, for the rest of his life, regardless of what we do.
This suspension would prohibit him from fishing, in addition to the hunting privileges. And the rationale, partially in Colorado, has been that anybody has the privilege of buying a license regardless of exercising that if they're a convicted felon.
I understand that, Mr. Cooley. I look and say, again, that's why I say I don't know that it's relevant to our decision here today, but I question why, and maybe his counsel can tell us why he feels he could hunt no matter what we do, because federal and state laws say he can't have a weapon.
And as I've stated previously when I've been up here, this suspension does not prohibit him from being in the field with his daughter or anybody else. It simply prohibits him from exercising the privilege of purchasing a license or engaging in hunting or fishing.
If you'd like to respond, Mr. Whedon, please feel free.
Thank you for that. And you're exactly right. The hunting component of it, in Colorado, we're a combined state. I forget what the way that we put it together, but if you lose your privileges to hunt, you also lose your privileges to fish. That's not the same in every interstate compact state, so it potentially would be very meaningful to him, but it's, I think there's wisdom to what you're saying, and I think your point is valid, certainly for Colorado, and then any compact state that would have that combined suspension. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Commissioner Vehil.
Well, my thoughts are, there are a lot of hungry people in Colorado, and to waste meat that's terrible. I know that the record says that he took some meat. I know what it was. He took the back straps and left all the rest of the meat because it was too hard to carry back to Florida or wherever he was going. So I don't have much sympathy for somebody that wastes game meat. That's awful. And so I would make a motion that we, if there is no more comment, I would make a motion we uphold the staff's decision on the lifetime suspension.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Blecka, any additional discussion? Let's do a roll call vote. Oh, from memory. Oh,
Adams.
Yes.
Blecka. Bray.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Hauser. Haskett.
Yes.
Hauser.
Yes.
McDaniel is absent.
Barty. Schaefer.
Yes.
Barty.
Yes.
Beal.
Yes.
Chair Zimmerman.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Laura, and Mr. Whedon, thank you for your time. I think it is important for us to hear that your client is remorseful and is sorry, and I do hope that he can accompany his daughter in the field and teach her that this is what happens when you do this, when you treat wildlife this way.
I will communicate that to him. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 25, consent agenda. Obviously at the back of the yellow agenda, we have all of our consent items. Earlier in the day, we did ask to pull anything off the consent, which we did not do. So I am looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Commissioner Behill, a second?
Second.
Commissioner Schaefer, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Oh, I'm
just
sorry,
co-
Commissioner Garcia.
I know it's late and I'm keeping people away from your cocktails. Are we on the consent agenda, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I just have, if I could have Manager Hometsky and Chick up for a moment, please.
Quick catch. Just in the nick of time.
On, first of all, JT, on waterfowl hunting Grand Valley. Great work. I didn't see an effective date, just curious.
Oh, great question. So the effective date, I believe, is still 40 days post this commission meeting after approval, is when it would come into, is that, Assistant Director or Steve might help me out with that.
These are at issue stage right now, so we'll be presenting final regulatory changes at the March meeting, and then they'll go into effect after that.
So great work on that, JT, and Corey, great work as well on Billy Creek. That is going to be amazing to see. And so what I'm asking is on both of those, what I'd like to see is with the director's permission, is to follow up some point down the road, because those are things I think that we can build on in the future. I think I kind of expect they're going to be extremely successful. And if we could get some sort of follow-up on those, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Any other comments regarding the consent agenda?
Sorry.
Oh, great. Glad you got it in time. Okay, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have public comment, and then before we recess, I do have one quick update. So just with regard to what time we're starting tomorrow. Bob Randall, representing Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Who is this Bob Randall guy anyway? What's he doing out there in the audience?
Good afternoon.
Welcome, good to see you.
Or good evening, I suppose.
Hey, don't rub it in.
Thank you, Madam
We
Chair,
do require
Commissioners.
a tie.
Director Gibb, what?
We require a tie.
You require a tie? Can I borrow?
Some hazing was to be expected.
It's great to see you all. Thanks for the chance to be here today. I'm going to address a topic that was mentioned briefly by Director Gibbs this morning, and that's a proceeding just getting underway by a sister agency, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, to implement Senate Bill 181 and how that could impact wildlife and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Among other things, Senate Bill 181 modified the mission of the Oil and Gas Commission. It called on the COGCC to evaluate and address cumulative impacts in permitting and to adopt a process to conduct an alternative location analysis. As to wildlife specifically, Senate Bill 181 directs the Oil and Gas Commission to regulate oil and gas operations in a reasonable manner that protects and minimizes adverse impacts to wildlife, among other resources, and to protect against adverse environmental impacts to any air, water, soil, or biological resource from oil and gas operations. We think that to fulfill these duties, the Oil and Gas Commission needs to know what wildlife are present, how they use an area, a project's potential impacts on wildlife, including cumulative impacts, and ways in which impacts can be avoided, minimized, or mitigated. So in the Oil and Gas Commission's rulemaking, we think certain things are important for wildlife. First, effective consultation between the Oil and Gas Commission and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Today, CPW consults on pads and drilling in sensitive wildlife habitat and other circumstances, but it's often too late. The operator already might have a surface use agreement with the surface owner, and it's hard to move pads or roads. It's hard to talk about avoiding certain times of the year that late in the process. We'd like to see CPW given the opportunity to consult earlier in the process at the proposed spacing and drilling plan stage to identify impacts and how they can be avoided, and that can include requiring off-site compensatory mitigation where it's appropriate. That's provided for in the bill. Second, as to mapping, today maps triggering CPW consultation are out of date because they're difficult to update. That has to be done through rulemaking before the Oil and Gas Commission. And they don't account for wildlife corridors, which are a new focus under Governor Polis's executive order. We'd like to see consultation based on a single map of important wildlife areas based on CPW data that can be updated as needed to protect the resource. Third, as to cumulative impacts, wildlife are particularly susceptible to cumulative impacts. Cumulative changes on a landscape, disturbance from light, noise, and roads, avoidance and abandonment of habitat, or disruption of migration corridors. And CPW is already very good at conducting cumulative impacts analyses. They do this regularly as a cooperating agency on federal decision-making under NEPA. And I think we need to view the cumulative impacts direction in light of Governor Polis's executive order on wildlife habitat and corridors. The governor obviously is interested in not just direct habitat loss, but impacts on connectivity. Finally, on alternative locations, you can't be sure you've avoided or minimized impacts if you haven't considered other ways a project can be implemented. Again, this is a common element of NEPA analysis with which CPW is very familiar. Again, we think that these elements are important to ensure that impacts to wildlife are appropriately addressed, and we think it's important that they're addressed this spring in the rulemaking rather than being put off indefinitely after a new professional commission is seated after July. We'll continue to work with CPW staff to ensure that the Oil and Gas Commission's rules are both protective of wildlife and workable for CPW. I'll plan to keep you all updated, and we hope that you'll be engaged in this historic and important process because the state's citizens and wildlife will be better for it. Thank you so much for your time and your service. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bob, and please let us know how we can stay apprised and what we can do. Any questions or comments? Thank you very
Great.
much for your
Thank
work
you all.
on this
Great
and for
to see you.
updating. Luke Wydell. Thank you, Luke. Thanks for bearing with us on the delay.
Not a problem. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Director Prenslow, good evening. My name is Luke Weedle. I'm a sportsman, and thanks for letting me come back and discuss a conversation I hope to continue about recreation and its effects on wildlife. I'll be as brief as I possibly can.
Luke, I apologize. One day I will get your last name correct.
Oh, don't worry about it. It's happened to me for 37 years. Colorado has nearly 6 million people and is growing rapidly. There's lots of people, including myself, that like to recreate. Outdoor recreation was expected to pump $63 billion into the state's economy in 2019. That's an 81% increase since 2014. So while recognizing the economic benefits of outdoor recreation, we must simultaneously recognize the enormous implications these trends have on wildlife and their habitat. Unfortunately, the effects of recreation are largely negative on wildlife. And we also must be honest about the reality that hunting, fishing, and trapping is paying the bill to conserve and manage wildlife. How do we avoid the tragedy of the commons when it comes to elk and other wildlife? How can this commission navigate the challenges of both promoting recreation while promoting the North American model of conservation and conserving wildlife and wildlife habitat and the hunting heritage which funds them? I'd like to revisit a couple suggestions I have for the commission. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is perhaps the most capable wildlife agency at conducting in-house research. But with 60% or nearly 60% of funding on the wildlife side coming from elk licenses alone, what are the financial implications of declining elk recruitment? That's my first suggestion, that you request from staff models or information showing what might happen to revenues with no additional funding mechanisms if declines in elk recruitment continue. That's my first suggestion. Secondly, I would encourage the commission to schedule a workshop or a presentation by CPW staff regarding the present state of information and knowledge regarding human disturbance in elk populations. A comprehensive, this might, hopefully, would further a conversation about best practices in recreation. Aren't there areas that we shouldn't be recreating? Are there areas that would have less impact, where recreation would have less impact on wildlife and so forth? So that presentation, I would suggest, would include field ops, terrestrial, and research. So that's my second suggestion. If the commission's willing to request these 2 items of staff, I would welcome the opportunity to assist in any ways that you think are helpful. In the end, I don't think any user group wants to see a decline in elk or other wildlife. I just don't think at this point people have a proper understanding of the significant impact that recreation's having on our wildlife and their habitat. But we can start by requesting the current data from staff in a strictly scientific way, but in a way in which we hit these issues head on. Considering this, I have recently been reflecting on the ag community and how they've been an important partner and a leader in wildlife conservation and habitat protection through easements and other self-imposed mechanisms. However, this was not the case 100 years ago. Agriculture, similar to sportsmen, recognized the destruction that was being caused on the landscape and changed drastically to support our wildlife and their habitat. So I hope that more forms of recreation can commit to following the example of the ag community, so we're able to conserve water, land, and wildlife to counteract impact. Lastly, I must say that my passion for wildlife and our hunting, fishing, and trapping traditions, as well as my concern for the future, is not one of self-interest. As a hunter, believe it or not, I don't care if I ever harvest another game animal again. But I do care that I have the ability to teach my kids and my grandkids about such passions and traditions. Last night when I came back from work, all 3 of my daughters had set up a mock elk camp for me using cushions from the couch and lots of kitchen supplies. What breaks my heart, though, is that those 3 young girls might not experience our wildlife in the same way that I have in the same wild places. Thanks for your consideration. I welcome any of your feedback, either today or in the coming weeks.
Luke, thank you, and thank you for continuing to bring this to our attention. I know this is a topic that we've talked about a lot today and in other meetings with other groups. You know, we've had presentations, if you recall, in Telluride from Great Old Broads for Wilderness, from Colorado Mountain Club, from other sportsmen with, with this concern. It's also our very reason we exist. Our mission statement is to both protect and provide for wildlife as well as, provide for recreation opportunities. So certainly merits continued discussion. I appreciate your steadfast commitment to the topic and continuing to make sure it's top of mind for us. Any questions, comments? Commissioner Bray.
Yes. Once again, I echo our chairperson's sentiments. I thank you for keeping this in front of us. It's as far as your suggestion of what we touched on that today earlier a little bit in the finance committee, just a high level look at what ifs, and I would encourage staff to come up with some more data for us. I mean, off the cuff, Justin suggested that a 1% decrease in elk licenses equals a certain amount of dollars. I think doing some high-level studies of that kind of thing could be beneficial for us. I really do. They are what ifs, but as we are facing elk license declines, particularly in the Southwest, we're going to have to issue less licenses. I mean, we're going to have to. What does that look like if that trend continues? At a high level, I mean, you can get pretty nitty-gritty with this, but at least start the conversation. I think it would be helpful to have that information, and we can portray it to our other outdoor partners. This is what the hunting and angling community is looking at, what they're doing. We can, I think it'd be valuable information.
Thank you, Commissioner Bray. Commissioner Vihel.
I would second that, and I think it would be pretty easy to do. Staff does a good job of modeling anyhow, and I think you could model a 1% decline in elk or a 5% decline in elk over time with inflation built in for expenses, but also on the revenue side where we're going to have an index of inflation attached to non-resident licenses. So that could all be built in there, because it would have a bigger impact on non-resident license if we have a decline because of the inflation factor. And we're going to have that on residents also now, I guess. So I'm thinking how it used to be. But yes, I think that could be easily done. Well, not easily, but it could be modeled so that we could look at it with some assumptions. Then we can't forecast weather events or the drought, etc. but over time, that should balance out. I mean, we're gonna have some changes, with beetle kill and those kind of things, but I think it would be really good to have that, so we would have it in our back pocket all the time and use it as a teaching, tool for recreationists and new trails, et cetera.
So I'm hearing general, I'm seeing some nodding heads, so I'm hearing, do we have general consensus that that's an ask of staff? Okay.
And we don't need it by tomorrow.
Tonight's fine, you know, at dinner. Thank you, I think we will certainly take that back to staff. I know earlier today I mentioned whether or not we would need an April meeting. I'll talk with, leadership team and see if that's something we wanna talk about, and, you know, I don't know if that's something we can pull together that quickly, but thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. 2 to go. Andrew Forks Gudmundson? Was it close? Horseshoes and hand grenades close? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Andrew Forkus Goodmanson. Really close. I'm here representing the League of Oil and Gas Impacted Coloradans, and on behalf of one of our partner organizations, Front Range Nesting Bald Eagle Studies. I'd like to start by echoing everything Mr. Randall said about the rulemaking and CPW's role in it and the importance of addressing wildlife impacts at this combined rulemaking rather than pushing everything to later this year at best. Wildlife is a part of the 181 mission change, and as such, incorporating it into the mission change rulemaking seems to make a lot of sense for us. I'm here to talk about a very closely related issue. It's our understanding that CPW is right now considering or finalizing changes to the statewide high priority habitat recommendations, HPHs, and policies in Colorado, including those for Tier 1 and Tier 2 species. We're asking for a chance for the public to review those recommendations and to comment on them before they're finalized. I recognize that these recommendations are not regulations and are therefore not required to be subject to public review like a regulatory or rulemaking process would be, but the significance of these recommendations merits public involvement. The State Wildlife Action Plan clearly addresses and encourages engaging technical experts and general stakeholders in the development of the SWAP, and notes the value of public participation efforts and how involving the public often improves the scientific content and policies that result. The recommendations here are particularly relevant in this exact moment in time. As Mr. Randall made clear, the COGCC is about to start undertaking its mission change rulemaking. When I wrote this, I thought I was going to go before Mr. Randall, so I was going to make that point in advance. But the recommendations present in the HPH manuscript will likely play a significant role in the mission change alternative location analysis and cumulative impact rulemaking. And the public ought to have an opportunity to review the document and suggest changes before it begins shaping this rulemaking. I'd like to focus on one specific species, since I'm representing front range nesting bald eagles that is particularly exemplary of the concerns that we have. It's our understanding that these new HPH recommendations will significantly reduce the buffer zones and protections for bald eagles and perhaps other raptors, and that this reduction will be based on U.S. Fish and Wildlife data. Whether an area is considered developed or not, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's 660-foot buffer is not relevant or applicable in Colorado's Front Range or other open lands in the state. Colorado has a unique population of bald eagles, and unlike pretty much the rest of the United States, the population is not increasing. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife buffers are based on outdated science in very different ecosystems, particularly northern boreal forests, which are very different than our Front Range. Based on this example, we're deeply concerned about the impact of these new HPH recommendations with respect to eagles and other species, especially given the high level of influence these recommendations will likely have on COGCC rulemaking efforts. Front Range Nesting Bald Eagle Studies has offered to share their current research and data gathered on Front Range bald eagles and their habitat and activities with the CPW. This data is currently being prepared for publication in a journal right now, but we'd be happy to make the underlying data available. In fact, some of it has been made available over the years, and we would like this to be able to inform CPW's HPH recommendations prior to their finalization. This data is based on 5 years of carefully designed research on numerous nests and roosts, and documents the actual on-the-ground impacts of oil and gas facilities and the encroachment of human housing development on these eagles. Front range nesting bald eagle studies methodology is well established and easily replicable, and much of the data has already been shared with CPW staff in some form or another over the years. As I said at the, oh, sorry, I'm almost done here. Public participation and stakeholder engagement is crucial for our democracy and can only improve our policies and decision making. Tapping into this reservoir of citizen science knowledge and expertise, the reservoir of citizen science knowledge and expertise that's available on this issue will result in better rules and more effective habitat and species protections. It also builds confidence in our state government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Director Gibbs.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And Andrew, it's great to see you. It seems like we're at an oil and gas meeting, right?
I know, new
It's a little
setting.
more peaceful here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed part of former Director Randall's comments too, but just want to make sure you know and everyone's clear too. Our February meeting for oil and gas will discuss wellbore integrity, and then the April-May will be, mission change that will wrap into wildlife as well as alternative site location and cumulative impacts. So that's kind of the unofficial schedule right now.
Yeah, and the reason for my appearance here is to make sure that as we go through that 3 combined rulemaking, that the wildlife part of the public health, safety, welfare, wildlife, and the environment doesn't get left behind. So thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Diana Tomback. Great. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Commissioners. I am a self-confessed straggler. I should have been here during the discussion of the wildlife killing contest, and I apologize for being delayed. My name is Diana Tomback, and I will give you my credentials. I have a master's in animal behavior, a PhD in biological sciences. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I have expertise in conservation biology. And I do want to address concerns about these wildlife killing contests, and maybe the last word in this would be helpful in some way. I want to talk about the coyote and its role in ecosystems or disrupting the balance of nature. But first I want to comment on the term varmint, which a lot of people in rural areas like to use to refer to a variety of animals. So many of the organizers and participants in these wildlife killing contests refer to the animals they target as varmints. According to Webster's dictionary, varmint is North American dialect and defined as, quote, a person, and I didn't know that, or animal regarded as troublesome or objectionable. According to Merriam-Webster, varmint is an animal considered a pest, specifically one classified